Marcus was still smiling when I opened the briefcase. He'd just finished his pitch about revolutionary AI technology, complete with profit projections that belonged in fairy tales. His confidence filled the Scottsdale mansion's den like expensive cologne, the same overwhelming presence I remembered from his childhood when he wanted something he couldn't afford. "So, Dad, ready to get in on the ground floor of the next unicorn?" I reached into the briefcase and removed a single manila folder. No fanfare, no explanation, just placed it on his polished coffee table like serving dinner. Marcus glanced down. His $1,000,000 smile flickered. "What's this?" "Chapter 11 filing," I said quietly. "DataSync Innovations, your previous company, filed 18 months ago." The document lay between us like a dead fish. Marcus grabbed it, scanning frantically for some way to explain away bankruptcy records. "This is old news, Dad, completely irrelevant to what we're discussing today." I placed a second folder beside the first. "Personal credit report, current as of last week." Marcus's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Tori moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Her face went pale as winter. $85,000 in credit card debt, I continued conversationally. 6 different cards, all maxed, minimum payments only. "Everyone carries debt," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its professional polish. "That's just modern cash flow management." The third folder landed with a soft thud. Business loan defaults, SyncFlow Solutions, $150,000. Marked uncollectible by First National last Tuesday. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into something less damning if he concentrated hard enough. "Dad, you're taking these completely out of context." "Am I?" I reached for the fourth folder, thicker than the others. Government letterhead visible through the clear sleeve. SEC inquiry notice, dated 6 days ago. They have some questions about unregistered securities offerings. Marcus's face went the color of old snow. "You filed a complaint against your own son?" "I didn't need to. Frank Morrison did. Helen Chen did. David Rodriguez did." I leaned back in the chair. Amazing how investors start talking to each other when product demonstrations keep getting postponed indefinitely. Tori grabbed the SEC documents, her hands shaking as she read. "This can't be legal. Investigating your own family." "Public records," I said. "Available to anyone who knows where to look. And I've gotten very good at looking." The fifth folder remained in my briefcase. I could feel Marcus watching it like a snake watching a mouse hole. "There's more," he said. Not a question. A statement of dread. I nodded toward the kitchen where Emma and Tyler were pretending to do homework while actually listening to every word. "Your children don't need to hear this part." "Hear what part?" Tori's voice cracked. I removed the final folder. Bank letterhead, official seal, legal language that would change everything. "Mortgage assignment notice," I said, placing it gently on top of the pile. "Valley Trust Bank was eager to sell your loan. 3 missed payments tend to make banks nervous about their exposure." Marcus lifted the document with fingers that had forgotten how to be steady. His eyes tracked across the page once, twice, then stopped moving entirely. "You bought our mortgage." "I bought your debt," I corrected. "There's a difference." The paper trembled in his grip. "You bought our house." Valley Trust preferred a cash buyer to foreclosure proceedings. Can't say I blame them. Tori stood so fast her chair tipped backward. "This is sick. This is revenge. You're destroying your own family." "I'm stopping my family from destroying other families." Marcus looked toward the kitchen where his children sat, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to ask me to fix his broken bicycle chain. Then the man returned, calculating angles and exits that no longer existed. "What do you want?" I reached into the briefcase one more time and removed 2 document stacks. The left pile thick and messy, the right pile clean and organized. "This," I tapped the left stack, "is foreclosure. Sheriff's sale, public auction. Your neighbor's reading about it in tomorrow's Arizona Republic." Emma and Tyler explaining to their classmates why strangers are measuring their bedrooms. Marcus stared at the papers like they were weapons pointed at his chest. This, I tapped the right stack, is deed in lieu transfer. You sign tonight, clean exit, no public record, no damage credit, no sheriff's deputies on your doorstep. And where exactly would we live? Tori asked, her voice sharp with panic. I own a rental duplex in Tempe. Good school district, fenced backyard with a pool. Emma mentioned she likes swimming. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope over an abyss. Why? Marcus asked, and suddenly he sounded like the 10-year-old who'd once cried when his bike chain broke. Why are you doing this? I looked at my son, remembering the day 15 years ago when he'd chosen another man's money over his father's love. Remembering the phone call 3 days ago when he'd remembered he had a father only because he needed an investor. Because some lessons cost everything to teach, I said, but they save everything that matters. In the doorway, Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit while Tyler pressed against the wall. Two children about to learn that actions have consequences even when you're too young to understand what the actions were. Marcus reached for the pen with hands that had built a fortune on lies, and were about to sign it all away with the truth. Some debts take 15 years to collect, but they're worth the wait when they come with interest earned in character instead of currency. The pen touched paper, and 20 years of choices finally came due. Marcus set the pen down without signing. I need to understand something first, he said, his voice steadier than his hands. How long have you been planning this? I didn't answer immediately. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Emma helping Tyler with math homework. Their voices a soft counterpoint to the tension crackling in the den. Normal children doing normal things while their world prepared to shift beneath their feet. The planning started 6 months ago, I said finally. But the lesson began 15 years ago, the day you walked out of our house. Tori moved to the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured neighborhood where every lawn looked like a magazine cover, and every house whispered expensive secrets. You've been watching us, investigating us. That's not normal father behavior, Bill. Normal fathers don't get abandoned by their sons for 15 years, I replied. Normal fathers don't have to read about their grandchildren's achievements in strangers' social media posts. Marcus flinched at that. He'd forgotten, perhaps, that Emma's swim team victories and Tyler's art contest wins had been documented online by proud teachers and other parents. Forgotten that his father might have been watching from the digital shadows, collecting fragments of lives he'd been excluded from. You could have reached out, Marcus said. You could have tried to reconnect before it came to this. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone pretended not to smell. I did try. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to a screenshot I'd saved. Your birthday, every year for 5 years. Text messages that showed as delivered but never answered. Marcus stared at the screen. I never got those. You got them. You chose not to respond. I put the phone away. Just like you chose not to respond when I sent graduation cards for Emma and Tyler. Just like you chose not to respond when I sent Christmas presents that were returned to sender. The weight of those rejections settled over the room like dust. 15 years of one-sided communication of a father trying to remain part of lives that had moved on without him. The day you called me 3 days ago, I continued, was the first time you'd acknowledged my existence since you were 20 years old, and you did it because you needed money. Tori turned from the window. So this is payback, revenge for feeling ignored. This is protection, I said. For Frank Morrison, who gave you his entire pension because you convinced him your software would revolutionize his retirement portfolio. For Helen Chen, who trusted you with her late husband's life insurance money. For 17 families who believed you were building something real instead of funding your fantasy. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. Those were legitimate investments. The technology development hit some delays, but that's normal in the startup world. The technology doesn't exist, Marcus. The words landed like a physical blow. Marcus's shoulders sagged as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. Mike Rodriguez is very thorough, I continued. 6 months of investigation. The AI platform you've been demonstrating is a $300 software package you bought from developers in Karachi. The same demo you've shown to 17 different investors, promising each one that they were getting in on the ground floor of the next Microsoft. Tori sank into her chair. Oh, God. Marcus, tell me that's not true. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. It's more complicated than that. No, I said quietly. It's exactly that simple. You took people's money under false pretenses. In some states they call that theft. In Arizona they call it securities fraud. The SEC documents lay spread across the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Marcus picked up one of the letters, reading it again as if the words might have changed since the last time. What happens if I don't sign? He asked. I gestured toward the left stack of papers. Tomorrow morning, Valley Trust Bank begins foreclosure proceedings. Sheriff's deputies post notices on your front door. Phoenix Business Journal runs a story about the promising tech entrepreneur who lost everything to investor fraud. Emma and Tyler read about their father's failures in their friends' parents' newspapers. And if I do sign, clean transfer, no public foreclosure, no newspaper coverage, no sheriff's deputies. Your children keep their dignity, even if you've lost yours. Marcus looked toward the kitchen where Emma was explaining fractions to her younger brother, with the patient intensity of someone who actually understood the concepts she was teaching. Tyler listened with the focused attention of a child who trusted his sister completely. The rental house, Tori said. What's it really like? 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1,500 square feet. Built in 1998, renovated last year. The neighborhood elementary school has an excellent rating. Same district Emma and Tyler attend now, so they wouldn't have to change schools or lose their friends. How much for rent? $2,200 a month. Market rate for the area. No family discount. You pay on time or you find somewhere else. The number hit them like cold water. After years of living beyond their means, the reality of actual market prices felt like punishment. We can't afford that, Tori whispered. You'll learn to, I said. Marcus will get a job, manual labor, construction warehouse work, something that pays weekly and builds character. You'll make payment plans with every investor Marcus defrauded. $10 a month if that's all you can manage, but something consistent that shows good faith. Marcus stared at his hands, soft hands that had never swung a hammer or lifted anything heavier than a laptop. For how long? Until you've paid back every dollar you stole. Until your children see their father work honest jobs for honest pay. Until you stop being the man who lies to people who trust him. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9:30. Thanksgiving evening settling into the quiet hours when families normally gathered around television sets or cleared dinner dishes together. Normal families who didn't have briefcases full of evidence reshaping their futures. I need to talk to the kids, Marcus said finally. You need to sign the papers first, I corrected. Then you can figure out how to explain to them why their lives are about to change. Marcus picked up the pen again. This time his hand didn't shake. The signature took 10 seconds. His name written in careful cursive across a line that represented the end of one life and the beginning of another. Tori signed next, her tears falling onto the document and smearing slightly before the ink dried. There, Marcus said, sliding the papers back to me. It's done. I filed the documents in my briefcase with the same careful precision I'd used to collect them. Moving truck can be here Saturday morning. Grace Thompson, the property manager, will meet you at the duplex with keys. What about our stuff, the furniture, the cars? Keep what fits, sell what doesn't. The Tesla will have to go, obviously. You can't make car payments on construction wages. Marcus nodded numbly. The Tesla had been his pride, a tangible symbol of success that impressed clients and neighbors. Now it was just another debt he couldn't afford. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into the briefcase for a final envelope. A list of every investor you defrauded, names, addresses, amounts owed. You'll be sending personal apology letters to each one, not form letters written by lawyers. Personal letters written by you explaining what you did and how you plan to make it right. And if I refuse, Then the criminal referrals go to the district attorney's office instead of just the civil complaints. Prison time instead of community service. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marcus took the envelope with the resignation of a man who'd finally run out of alternatives. "I should go talk to Emma and Tyler now," he said. "Yes." I agreed. "You should." As he walked toward the kitchen, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Marcus's shoulders were straighter now, as if signing away his house had somehow made him taller. The weight of maintaining lies is heavier than most people realize. Sometimes losing everything is the first step toward finding something worth keeping. In the kitchen, I could hear Marcus's voice explaining to his children that they were going to have an adventure. A new house with a pool. A chance to start fresh. He didn't mention the shame or the fear or the years of hard work ahead. Those conversations would come later when the children were old enough to understand that sometimes adults make mistakes so large they reshape entire families. For now, it was enough that they would have a roof over their heads and a father who was finally ready to earn the right to keep it there. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the kitchen as Marcus explained their adventure to Emma and Tyler. Their voices carried the excited energy of kids who thought moving meant something fun was about to happen, not that their world was falling apart in careful legal increments. Tori stood by the window watching neighbors' houses light up with the warm glow of normal Thanksgiving evenings. Families settling in for football games and leftover turkey sandwiches, blissfully unaware that the Henderson family drama was reshaping itself 3 doors down. "How long have you known?" she asked without turning around. "About the fraud, 6 months. About Marcus choosing money over family, 15 years. She finally faced me, her makeup smeared from crying, but her spine straighter than it had been all evening. "I mean about us. About our marriage, our problems, our debt. How long have you been watching us pretend everything was fine?" The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time focused on Marcus's business crimes that I'd almost forgotten about the personal casualties scattered in their wake. "Mike Rodriguez is thorough," I said. "Financial investigations tend to reveal more than just business problems." "So you know about the credit cards, the mortgage payments we've missed, the school tuition we're behind on." She laughed, but it came out broken. "You probably know things about our finances that I don't know." She wasn't wrong. The private investigator's report had painted a devastating picture of a family living paycheck to paycheck despite appearing wealthy. Designer clothes purchased with credit. Private school tuition funded by business loans. Even their groceries charged to cards that were approaching their limits. "The lifestyle was unsustainable," I said gently. "Even without the investor fraud, you were heading for bankruptcy within 6 months." Tori sank into her chair like a deflated balloon. I knew something was wrong. The stress, the late-night phone calls, the way Marcus would change the subject whenever I asked about money. But I didn't want to know how wrong. From the kitchen came Tyler's voice asking if their new house had a basketball hoop. Marcus promising they'd get one, his tone carrying the false brightness of a parent trying to make disaster sound like opportunity. "He's good at that," Tori said, following my gaze toward the kitchen. "Making bad news sound like good news. Making promises he can't keep sound believable. I used to think it was confidence. Now I realize it was just practice." "When did you first suspect he was lying to investors?" She considered the question with the careful precision of someone who'd been asking herself the same thing for months. "The product demonstrations. He kept scheduling them, then canceling at the last minute. Technical difficulties, he'd say. Server problems. Beta testing issues that needed resolving first. But there were no servers to have problems. I didn't know that then. I just knew that every time someone wanted to see the actual software in action, something prevented it from happening." She rubbed her temples. "Frank Morrison called the house twice asking when he'd be able to see his investment actually working. I told him to call Marcus directly." Frank Morrison, 73 years old, widowed, invested his entire pension rollover because Marcus had convinced him that artificial intelligence was the future of retirement security. Now Frank was facing his golden years with nothing but Social Security and the hope that somehow his money might be recovered through civil litigation. Did you ever ask Marcus directly about the delays? Once, he got angry, said I didn't understand the complexity of software development, that investors expecting immediate results were unrealistic. Tori's voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who'd stopped believing her own excuses. He made me feel stupid for asking. That sounded like the Marcus I remembered. Even as a child, he'd possessed an remarkable ability to make other people feel foolish for questioning his version of events. A useful skill for a con artist, less useful for a son or husband. The night he called you, Tori continued, he spent 2 hours rehearsing what he was going to say, practicing his pitch about your real estate success, figuring out how to work in the investment opportunity without making it sound desperate. It sounded desperate anyway. Everything sounds desperate when you're listening to someone practice manipulation techniques on their own father. Emma appeared in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Mommy, Daddy says we're moving to a house with a pool. Is that true? Tori's composure cracked for just a moment before she pulled it back together. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to have a new adventure. When? Very soon, this weekend. Emma studied her mother's face with the unsettling perceptiveness that children sometimes display. Are you sad about moving? A little, Tori admitted. But sometimes changes that seem scary at first turn out to be good things. Like when we changed schools and I met Jessica. Exactly like that. Emma nodded with the serious acceptance of a 12-year-old who'd learned to adapt to adult decisions she couldn't control. Can I bring all my books? Of course you can bring your books. What about Tyler's art supplies? He's working on a picture of our family for art class. The innocence of the question hit like a physical blow. Tyler drawing pictures of his family, while that family imploded around him, too young to understand that the people in his drawing were about to become very different versions of themselves. Tyler can bring everything that's important to him, I said, speaking directly to Emma for the first time that evening. She studied me with clear, serious eyes. Are you really our grandfather? I am. Daddy said you live far away and work a lot. I live across town, and I do work a lot, but not the kind of work your daddy does. What kind of work do you do? I fix things that are broken. Emma nodded, like this made perfect sense to her. Like when the sink stops working. Sometimes like that. Are you going to fix the things that are broken in our family? The question stopped me cold. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes fixing broken families requires breaking them a little more first? That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is force people to face consequences they've been avoiding. I'm going to try, I said finally. Good, Emma said with the decisive authority of someone who'd clearly given the matter serious thought. I think our family needs fixing. She disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving Tori and me alone with the weight of a child's honesty. Emma had seen what the adults had been working so hard to hide, that their family was fundamentally broken, and had been for longer than anyone wanted to admit. She's not wrong, Tori said quietly. No, she's not. So what happens now, after we move, after Marcus gets this construction job, after we start making restitution payments? What does our family look like on the other side of this? It was a fair question, and I wasn't entirely sure I had a fair answer. Consequences were easier to engineer than outcomes. I could force Marcus to face the results of his choices, but I couldn't force him to become a better man. That work would have to come from him. That depends on Marcus, I said. And on you. And on whether you decide to build something real or just wait for this to blow over so you can go back to building something fake. Marcus returned from the kitchen looking like a man who'd just explained to his children that Santa Claus was going on vacation indefinitely. Exhausted, but trying to maintain the illusion that everything would somehow work out fine. They're excited about the pool, he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Kids are resilient, I replied. Adults less so. The briefcase sat closed on the coffee table between us, its contents having served their purpose. The documents inside had accomplished what 15 years of silence couldn't. They'd forced Marcus to face the difference between the man he thought he was and the man his actions had made him. Now came the harder part, learning to live with consequences instead of running from them, learning to build something real instead of managing something fake, learning to be a father worth having instead of a cautionary tale his children would spend years trying to forget. Grace Thompson will meet you at the duplex Saturday morning at 10, I said, standing to leave. She'll walk you through everything you need to know about the property. Marcus nodded, then hesitated. Will you want to see the kids after this? The question surprised me. After everything that had happened, after all the documents and ultimatums and forced choices, Marcus was still thinking about his children's relationship with their grandfather. Maybe there was hope for him after all. Ask me again in 6 months, I said, when you've shown me who you want to be. And if I become someone worth knowing, then maybe we'll find out what grandfather means when it's not just a word adults use to manipulate each other. I walked toward the door, leaving behind a family that would look very different by Saturday evening. Behind me, I could hear Emma asking Tyler if he wanted to help her pack her books for their adventure. Children, I reflected, were much better at starting over than the adults who were supposed to be taking care of them. Some lessons take everything to teach, but the students who learn them become teachers themselves. In 15 years, Emma and Tyler would remember this night not as the evening their family fell apart, but as the evening someone finally cared enough to put it back together properly. Even if that someone was the grandfather they'd just met for the first time. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of Arizona winter sunshine that makes transplants from colder states feel guilty about complaining. I drove to the duplex early, wanting to walk through the property one more time before Grace Thompson handed over the keys to a family whose lives I'd just rearranged. The rental sat on a quiet street in Tempe where the houses were built for function rather than impression. Modest brick construction, mature trees that provided actual shade instead of decorative value sidewalks, where children could safely ride bicycles without worrying about property values. Grace was already there, clipboard in hand, making notes about minor repairs that would need attention before the next tenant cycle. She looked up as I approached, her expression carrying the professional neutrality of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions about sudden tenant changes. Morning, Bill. Family should be here in about an hour with the moving truck. Everything ready? Fresh paint in the kids' bedrooms. Fixed that loose faucet in the main bathroom. Pool's clean and the heater's working. She glanced at her notes. You want to remind them about the garbage pickup schedule, Tuesday and Friday mornings, bins to the curb by 7. Simple details, normal details, the kind of information that mattered when you were building a life instead of performing one. I'll let them know. Also, there's a folder on the kitchen counter with information about the school district, local pediatrician, that sort of thing. Figured they might need it with the transition. Grace Thompson had been managing rental properties for 20 years. She'd seen plenty of families forced to downsize by circumstances beyond their control, and she'd developed a quiet competence for making difficult transitions slightly less traumatic. Appreciate that. Kids handling it okay. Better than the adults. She nodded with the knowing expression of someone who'd watched this particular drama play out in various forms over the years. Always do. Kids adapt. Parents catastrophize. A moving truck rumbled around the corner, followed by Marcus driving a Honda Civic that looked embarrassingly practical after years of Tesla ownership. The downgrade was visible from 3 blocks away, from performance luxury to reliable transportation, from statement vehicle to simple function. Emma and Tyler tumbled out of the back seat before the car fully stopped racing toward the house with the uncontainable energy of children discovering new territory. Their excitement was genuine, untainted by adult understanding of what this move actually represented. Pool's in the backyard, Grace called after them. Through the side gate. Their voices faded as they disappeared around the corner, leaving the adults to handle the heavier business of moving a family's entire existence from one zip code to another. Marcus emerged from the car, moving like someone who'd forgotten how to sleep. 3 days of consequences had aged him in ways that made his designer clothes look like costumes borrowed from someone else's life. Tori followed, carrying a box labeled Emma's Books in careful handwriting. "Morning," Marcus said, attempting normal conversation while surveying the property that would become their new reality. "Neighborhood seems quiet." "Good schools," Grace replied. "Low crime. Most of your neighbors have been here 10 years or more. Stable community." The moving crew began unloading furniture that looked oversized for the rental's modest rooms. A sectional sofa that had fit perfectly in the Scottsdale mansion's great room now dominated the duplex's living space. Dining room chairs that had been part of an elegant ensemble now looked pretentious, crowded around a smaller table. "Some of this isn't going to fit," Tori observed, watching the movers wrestle a king-size bedroom suite through the front door. "Sell what doesn't work," I suggested. "Craigslist Facebook Marketplace. Turn excess furniture into grocery money." The practicality of the advice seemed to hit her like cold water. Tori had spent years accumulating beautiful things as proof of success. Now those same beautiful things were becoming obstacles to survival. Emma reappeared from the backyard, breathless with discovery. "The pool has a diving board, and there's orange trees. Can we pick the oranges?" "They're your oranges now," Grace said. "Tree produces more fruit than one family can eat. Neighbors might appreciate sharing." "I'm going to make orange juice every morning," Emma declared with the confident enthusiasm of someone who'd never actually made orange juice from scratch. Tyler emerged next, carrying a small lizard he'd discovered sunning itself on the pool deck. "Can we keep him?" "He's really small and he doesn't bite." "Lizards live outside," Marcus said automatically. "You can visit him, but he stays in the yard." "What's his name?" "You'll have to ask him." Tyler considered this seriously, then carried the lizard back toward the pool to continue their conversation. The morning progressed with the organized chaos that accompanies any family relocation. Boxes labeled in Tori's careful handwriting found their way to appropriate rooms. Furniture was rearranged multiple times as everyone discovered that their possessions had different relationships with each other in smaller spaces. By noon, the moving truck was empty and the family was surrounded by cardboard boxes that represented the archaeological layers of their previous life. School records, photo albums, Tyler's art supplies, and Emma's extensive book collection. The debris of a family learning to rebuild itself from available materials. "Lunch," Tori suggested, surveying the chaos with the expression of someone trying to find order in entropy. "Pizza." Emma voted immediately. "Pizza sounds perfect." Marcus agreed, reaching for his wallet before remembering that pizza delivery was now a budget consideration rather than an automatic convenience. I watched him calculate the cost in his head, weighing family morale against financial realities. These were the kinds of decisions he'd never had to make before, when other people's money had insulated him from the arithmetic of daily survival. "I'll cover lunch," I said. "Moving day pizza is a grandfather tradition." Marcus started to protest, then stopped himself. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford, and accepting help gracefully was a skill he'd need to develop quickly. While we waited for delivery, I found myself walking through the duplex with Emma, who provided running commentary on everything from the kitchen's cozy size to the bathroom's perfect medicine cabinet. Her ability to find positives in circumstances that had devastated her parents was remarkable. "This feels more like home already," she said, settling onto the living room floor to begin unpacking her books. "The other house was pretty, but it didn't feel like ours." "What does home feel like?" She considered the question with 12-year-old seriousness. "Like you can touch things without worrying about breaking them. Like you can make noise without bothering anyone. Like the people who live there actually want to be there." Her answer carried more insight than most adults manage in years of therapy. Emma had recognized something about their previous life that her parents had been too invested in the performance to acknowledge that their Scottsdale mansion had been a stage set rather than a home. You're pretty smart for someone who's only 12. I'm almost 13, she corrected, and my mom says I'm an old soul. What does that mean? I think it means I notice things adults think kids don't understand. The pizza arrived as the afternoon shadows began lengthening across the duplex's small front yard. We ate sitting on boxes in the living room, paper plates balanced on our knees, the formal dining room protocols of their previous life, replaced by the practical intimacy of a family learning to function in smaller spaces. Tyler had made friends with the neighbor's cat, which had apparently decided that the new family's moving day chaos was worthy of investigation. The cat sat in the doorway washing itself with the supreme confidence of an animal that knew it belonged somewhere. Everything always finds its place eventually, Grace observed, watching Tyler attempt to coax the cat closer with pepperoni offerings. Does it? Tori asked, and the question carried weight beyond furniture arrangement. In my experience, yes. Takes time, requires patience, but things settle where they're supposed to be. Grace began packing up her clipboard and paperwork. You've got my number if anything needs attention. Emergency repairs, questions about the neighborhood, whatever comes up. After she left, the family faced their first evening in a space that was theirs by necessity rather than choice. The sun set through windows that faced different directions than their previous home, casting unfamiliar shadows across rooms that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Bath time, Tori announced, beginning the process of establishing routines in their changed circumstances. Do we have towels? Tyler asked a practical question that revealed how thoroughly their old life had been disrupted. We have everything we need, Marcus said, though his voice carried the uncertainty of someone still discovering what need meant when it wasn't disguised as want. As the children settled into their new bedrooms, I prepared to leave them to figure out how a family functions when it's forced to be honest about its resources and limitations. Bill, Marcus called as I reached the door. Thank you for the pizza, for making this, he gestured around the duplex, possible. Don't thank me yet, I said. Tomorrow you start construction work. 5:30 wake-up calls. 8 hours of physical labor. Pay that barely covers expenses if you're careful with every dollar. I know. Do you? Because knowing something intellectually and living it daily are completely different experiences. Marcus looked around the duplex that represented both punishment and opportunity. I'm going to find out, aren't I? Yes, I said. You are. Some lessons require everything to teach properly, but the students who survive them become teachers themselves, eventually passing on wisdom that can only be earned through experience. Marcus was about to begin his real education. Not in software development or investor relations or any of the performance skills he'd mastered, but in the more fundamental curriculum of work responsibility and the daily choices that build character one decision at a time. His children would be watching every step of that education, learning lessons about resilience and redemption that no amount of money could have taught them. In 15 years, they'd remember this day not as the end of their comfortable childhood, but as the beginning of understanding what family actually means when it's built on truth instead of pretense. Monday morning arrived at 5:15 with all the subtlety of a construction alarm. I knew this because Marcus called me at 5:30, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd forgotten that manual labor starts before sunrise. I can't find my work boots, he said without preamble. Did you buy work boots? A pause. I thought the ones I have for hiking would work. Hiking boots aren't steel-toed. You'll need actual work boots if you want to keep all 10 toes. I glanced at my bedside clock. Hardware store opens at 6. You've got 30 minutes to get there, buy boots, and still make it to the job site by 6:30. The hardware store sells work boots. The question revealed more about Marcus's previous life than any financial document could. A man who'd spent 15 years in office buildings and conference rooms navigating a world where the most dangerous thing he encountered was paper cuts from contract negotiations. Carlos texted you the address yesterday. Buy boots, buy work gloves, buy lunch, because there's nowhere to eat near the construction site. I hung up and lay in bed listening to the pre-dawn quiet, wondering if Marcus would actually make it through his first day, or if he'd find some excuse to quit before lunch break. Physical labor has a way of revealing character, quickly sorting people into those who adapt and those who make elaborate excuses for why the work is beneath them. By 8 o'clock I had my answer. Carlos Rodriguez called while I was finishing my coffee. "Your boy showed up," he said, sounding surprised. "Late, but he showed up. Bought proper boots, brought lunch, ready to work." "How's he doing?" "Like someone who's never held a hammer in his life. But he's listening, following directions, not complaining about getting dirty." Carlos paused. "Most white-collar guys last about 2 hours before they remember urgent appointments somewhere else." And Marcus, still here, sweating through his shirt, but still here. That afternoon brought the first restitution check to Frank Morrison, $50 toward a $12,000 debt, but $50 Marcus had earned by carrying lumber and learning which end of a nail gun to point away from his body. Frank called that evening while I was working in my shop restoring a 1954 Craftsman table saw that had been abandoned in someone's garage for 20 years. "Got a check today," Frank said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who'd spent months expecting nothing and receiving less. "From your son." "How much?" $50. Probably took him all day to earn that much doing honest work." "Probably did." "There was a note with it. Handwritten, not typed. Said he was sorry. Said he understood that sorry doesn't pay bills. Said this was just the first payment, and there'd be one every month until the debt was settled." I set down my sandpaper. "What did you think of the note?" "Sounded like someone who'd finally figured out the difference between promises and payments." Frank was quiet for a moment. "I'll believe it when I see 6 months of consistent checks. But it's a start." A start. That was more optimism than Frank Morrison had expressed since discovering his retirement savings had been converted into Marcus's car payments and private school tuition. Tuesday brought news that SyncFlow Solutions had officially dissolved its assets, frozen pending civil litigation and SEC investigation. The Phoenix Business Journal ran a follow-up story that included quotes from disappointed investors and regulatory officials, but stopped short of naming Marcus as the primary target of the investigation. Professional courtesy, perhaps, or recognition that destroying someone's reputation completely serves no purpose once the consequences are already in motion. Wednesday brought Emma's first parent-teacher conference at their new school district. Tori attended alone, Marcus being unavailable during school hours due to construction work that ended when the sun set rather than when meetings were convenient. "How did it go?" I asked when Tori called that evening. "Better than expected. Emma's test scores are excellent. She's made friends with 3 girls in her class. Her teacher says she has a remarkably positive attitude for someone going through a major family transition. Kids are resilient." "That's what everyone keeps saying. But I think Emma's not just resilient, she's relieved. Like she's finally allowed to be herself instead of performing the role of successful executive's daughter." The observation was more insightful than Tori probably realized. Children absorb their parents' stress even when they don't understand its source. Emma had spent years sensing that her family's life was somehow precarious, even when all the visible evidence suggested security and success. "What about Tyler's adjustment?" "Harder. He misses his old room, his old toys that didn't fit in the new house. But he started drawing again. Yesterday he drew a picture of our family standing in front of the duplex. Everyone was smiling. Even you and Marcus. Especially us. Tyler said we look happier in the new house because we don't have to whisper anymore." Children notice things adults think they hide successfully. Tyler had recognized that his parents' relationship had been strained by the constant pressure of maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle. In the duplex where pretense was impossible and resources were limited, Marcus and Tori were learning to communicate honestly for the first time in years. Thursday morning brought the first crisis. Marcus woke up unable to move his right shoulder, the result of 3 days of lifting materials and learning to use muscles that had been decorative rather than functional for most of his adult life. "I can't work like this," he told Tori, his voice tight with pain and frustration. "So take Advil and work anyway," she replied with the unsympathetic pragmatism of someone who'd realized their family had no backup plan. "Carlos is expecting you. We need the money." "I'm not a machine." "No, you're a man with children to feed and restitution payments to make. The shoulder will heal. The rent comes due whether you're comfortable or not." The conversation overheard from the kitchen where Emma was making breakfast represented a fundamental shift in their family dynamic. Tori had stopped enabling Marcus's tendency to avoid discomfort, and Marcus was learning that his physical limitations were less important than his family's needs. He took Advil, bought a shoulder brace at the drugstore, and worked a full 8-hour day carrying materials with his left hand when his right couldn't manage the weight. "Adapted," Carlos reported when I checked in that evening. "Figured out how to do the job around his injury instead of using the injury as an excuse not to do the job." Friday brought the second restitution payment, this one to Helen Chen. $40 toward an $8,000 debt, accompanied by another handwritten note apologizing for the delay in recognizing his responsibility to repay money that should never have been taken. Helen called that evening, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to allow hope to take root easily. "I appreciate the gesture," she said, "but $40 a month means I'll be 130 years old before this debt is repaid." "It's not about the timeline," I replied. "It's about the consistency. Marcus is learning to honor commitments instead of making excuses for breaking them." "And what am I supposed to live on while he's learning character development?" "My late husband's life insurance was supposed to fund my retirement. Now I'm working part-time at a grocery store to pay for prescription medications." The anger in her voice was justified. Helen Chen had trusted Marcus with money that represented security, independence, and dignity in her later years. His education and responsibility was coming at the cost of her basic needs. "The civil litigation will recover more," I said, though we both knew that frozen assets rarely yielded full restitution for fraud victims. "Will it? Or will it recover lawyer fees and court costs while the actual victims wait for justice that never comes?" I didn't have a good answer for that question. Justice and recovery rarely arrived on the same timeline, and victims often discovered that legal vindication provided little comfort when bills came due. But character development, I was learning, required witnesses. Marcus needed to face the human cost of his choices directly through voices like Helen Chen's that reminded him daily that his mistakes had names and faces and consequences that extended far beyond his own family's circumstances. Saturday morning found me at the duplex, arriving unannounced, to discover Tyler teaching neighborhood children how to play a card game he'd invented that combined elements of poker with marine biology facts. Emma was reading by the pool, her homework completed, and her weekend free for the kind of unstructured exploration that had been impossible when every moment was scheduled around maintaining appearances. "How's the shoulder?" I asked Marcus, who was attempting to assemble a bookshelf with the determined concentration of someone learning that instructions actually matter when you don't have professional assembly services. "Better. Still sore but functional." He looked up from the hardware. "I never realized how much I took for granted, having money to pay people to do things I didn't want to learn how to do. And now I'm learning that doing things yourself isn't punishment, it's just life." The bookshelf, when completed, would hold Emma's extensive collection and Tyler's art supplies in the organized fashion that turned a house into a home. Simple furniture assembled by hand, serving the basic human need for order and beauty in small spaces. "The kids seem settled," I observed. "They are. Better than Tori and I are, honestly." Marcus sat back on his heels, surveying his carpentry work. Emma made friends immediately. Tyler's drawing again. "They're sleeping through the night without anxiety nightmares." They were having anxiety nightmares. For months. Tyler would wake up crying, saying he was scared something bad was going to happen. Emma started hoarding food in her bedroom like she was preparing for some disaster she couldn't name. Children absorb stress through their skin, processing adult anxieties through dreams and behaviors that reveal truths parents prefer not to acknowledge. Marcus and Tori's financial house of cards had been collapsing slowly for months, creating atmospheric pressure that the children felt even when they couldn't identify its source. And now they're sleeping peacefully in rooms that smell like fresh paint instead of fear. The assessment was surprisingly insightful for someone who'd spent years avoiding insight in favor of performance. Marcus was learning to see his family clearly for the first time, recognizing needs he'd been too busy maintaining illusions to notice. Tori found a job, he continued. Marketing coordinator at a nonprofit, 30 hours a week, decent benefits, work that actually matters instead of selling things people don't need to people who can't afford them. How does she feel about the salary difference? Relieved, actually. She said it's nice to earn money doing something she can explain to her children without feeling ashamed. The comment revealed more about their previous life than Marcus probably intended. The gradual corruption that occurs when income depends on maintaining fictions, when family resources come from manipulating other people's hopes and fears. What about you? How are you adjusting to honest work? Marcus considered the question while testing the stability of his completed bookshelf. It's harder than I expected, not just physically but mentally. When you spend years convincing people that you're smarter than you are, it's humbling to discover how much you don't know about basic things. Like what? Like how buildings actually get built, how materials behave under stress, how much skill it takes to do physical work efficiently instead of just throwing muscle at problems. He paused. Carlos has been doing construction for 25 years. Watching him work is like watching someone speak a language I'm just learning the alphabet for. The analogy was apt. Marcus was learning the grammar of honest work, discovering that competence required time and practice, rather than confidence and presentation skills. But you're still showing up every morning. I am, because showing up is apparently the first requirement for everything else. Some lessons can only be learned through repetition. Character develops through daily choices rather than dramatic gestures, through the accumulated weight of small decisions that gradually reshape who someone becomes. Marcus was discovering that redemption wasn't an event but a process measured not in grand gestures, but in alarm clocks, answered work completed, and promises kept one day at a time. The bookshelf stood sturdy and level, ready to hold the books and art supplies that would help two children build their futures on foundations more solid than their parents had managed to provide. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. And sometimes small victories repeated daily add up to lives worth living. 3 months into Marcus's construction career, I received an unexpected call from the SEC investigator handling his case. Janet Walsh had the crisp professionalism of someone who'd spent years untangling financial frauds that were more creative than criminal, more pathetic than predatory. "We'd like to schedule a final interview with Mr. Henderson," she said. "His cooperation has been exemplary, and we're prepared to recommend a settlement that avoids criminal prosecution." "What kind of settlement? 5-year ban from securities industry, community service, supervised restitution plan. No jail time if he maintains compliance with all conditions." The relief I felt surprised me. Somewhere during the months of watching Marcus wake up at 5:30 every morning, I'd stopped wanting him to suffer and started wanting him to succeed. The distinction mattered more than I'd expected. "What about the civil litigation?" "Separate track, but his cooperation with us will help with those negotiations. Judges appreciate defendants who take responsibility instead of hiding behind lawyers." That afternoon, I drove to the construction site where Marcus was learning to install drywall with the methodical precision of someone who'd discovered that shortcuts in construction work become visible problems that can't be talked away. "Good news," I told him during his lunch break. "SEC wants to settle. No criminal charges if you continue cooperating." Marcus set down his sandwich, a practical combination of peanut butter and bologna that provided protein and calories without requiring refrigeration or dignity. "What's the catch?" 5-year industry ban. You can't work in securities, can't raise investment capital, can't manage other people's money in any professional capacity. "That's not a catch," he said. That's a relief. I never want to touch other people's money again." The sincerity in his voice was new. 3 months of honest work had taught him the difference between earning money and extracting it, between creating value and manipulating perceptions. "There's something else," I continued. "Community service requirement. 200 hours at a nonprofit organization." "What kind of nonprofit?" "Your choice, but it has to involve direct service to people affected by financial fraud. Victim counseling, financial literacy education, something that puts you face to face with the human cost of white-collar crime." Marcus nodded slowly. "I think I know exactly where I'd like to volunteer." 6 weeks later, Marcus began spending Saturday mornings at the Senior Resource Center teaching elderly residents about investment scams and financial fraud prevention. His first class included 12 people who'd lost retirement savings to various schemes, their stories ranging from telemarketing fraud to Ponzi schemes to fake investment opportunities that sounded remarkably similar to sink flow solutions. "The thing about these scams," Marcus told his first class, "is that they work because they promise something that sounds too good to be true, but not so good that you immediately recognize it as impossible." Frank Morrison attended that first session sitting in the back row with the careful attention of someone evaluating whether the presenter was worth trusting. Afterward, he approached Marcus with the measured wariness of a man who'd learned that friendly strangers often carried expensive consequences. "Interesting presentation," Frank said. "You spoke like someone who knows how these scams work from the inside." "I do," Marcus replied. "I ran one for 18 months before my father stopped me." The honesty was brutal and complete. No hedging, no euphemisms, no attempt to soften the edges of his responsibility. Frank studied Marcus like he was reading a book written in a language he was just learning to understand. "Why should I trust anything you say about avoiding fraud when you're a fraud yourself?" "Because I know exactly how convincing liars can be when they're selling something you want to believe in." Frank considered this answer with the careful thought of someone who'd spent months learning to distrust his own judgment. "Fair point," he said finally. "Same time next week. Every Saturday until the community service requirement is fulfilled. After that, if the program helps people, I'll keep doing it because it's the right thing to do. And if it doesn't help, then I'll find something else that does." The exchange represented a kind of progress that couldn't be measured in restitution payments or construction wages. Marcus was learning to earn trust through transparency rather than manipulation, to build relationships based on shared understanding rather than concealed advantage. Spring brought changes that rippled through the family like water finding its level. Emma made honor roll while simultaneously becoming the neighborhood's unofficial swimming instructor, teaching younger children water safety in the duplex's pool. Tyler discovered that art supplies were more interesting when purchased with allowance money earned through household chores rather than simply appearing whenever requested. Tori received a promotion at the nonprofit, her marketing skills proving more valuable when applied to causes she actually believed in rather than products that existed primarily to generate commissions. The additional salary meant Marcus could increase his monthly restitution payments from $50 to $75, a small increment that nevertheless represented progress measured in actual numbers rather than promised intentions. "We're saving money," Tori announced one evening, showing me a spreadsheet that tracked their monthly expenses with the detailed attention of people who'd learned that financial security required knowing where every dollar went. "How much?" "Enough to start an emergency fund. $300 so far, but it's $300 we've never had before." The achievement was modest but significant. For the first time in their marriage, Marcus and Tori were spending less than they earned building resources instead of consuming them. The discipline required for this transformation had restructured their relationship, forcing conversations about priorities and values that they'd avoided when credit cards provided the illusion of unlimited options. "What's the goal?" 6 months of expenses and savings. Then start a college fund for the kids. Tori's voice carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd discovered that planning for the future felt better than performing success in the present. "That's going to take years." "Good," Marcus said, emerging from the kitchen where he'd been helping Tyler with a science project about soil erosion. Years of doing things right instead of months of pretending we could afford things we couldn't. The comment revealed how thoroughly Marcus's perspective had shifted. Time had become an ally rather than an enemy, patience a strategy rather than a limitation. Building something real required accepting that progress happened slowly, that sustainable change accumulated through daily choices rather than dramatic gestures. Speaking of college funds, I said, reaching into my jacket for an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to present it. "What's this?" Tori asked, recognizing legal document formatting. "Trust fund documents, for Emma and Tyler. Nothing elaborate, but enough to ensure they can attend college without accumulating debt." Marcus started to protest, then caught himself. "What are the conditions?" "Same ones that applied to the rental house. Trust remains active only as long as you continue making restitution payments and maintain steady employment. If you regress to fraud or deception, the trust converts to a scholarship fund for children of fraud victims." The terms were harsh but necessary. Trust, I'd learned, required verification systems that made betrayal more costly than honesty. "You'd really take away our children's college fund if we screwed up again." "I'd protect your children's college fund from parents who might screw up again," I corrected. "The money belongs to Emma and Tyler, not to you. You're just the guardians of their opportunity." Marcus read through the documents with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that legal language mattered more than verbal assurances. "Thank you," he said finally. "This means they'll have choices we didn't give them. It means they'll have the foundation to make better choices than we did." Summer arrived with the kind of desert heat that makes air conditioning a necessity rather than a luxury. Marcus had progressed from carrying materials to operating equipment, his construction skills developing through the patient repetition that transforms beginners into competent workers. "Carlos offered me a supervisor position," he announced one evening, his pride carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "What does that involve?" "Training new workers, coordinating between different crew specialties, quality control inspections, more responsibility, better pay opportunity to learn project management from the construction side instead of the financial side." The promotion represented validation that Marcus's work ethic had been noticed and valued by people who measured competence through performance rather than presentation. Carlos Rodriguez hired and fired based on results, making his approval worth more than any performance review from Marcus's previous career. "When do you start?" "Monday. $15 an hour raise, which means we can increase restitution payments to $125 monthly and still maintain our savings plan." The mathematics of honest work were becoming familiar to Marcus. Income earned through labor could be calculated, budgeted, and allocated towards specific goals. Unlike investment scheme profits, construction wages arrive predictably, allowing long-term planning based on realistic projections rather than optimistic fantasies. "Have you told the kids?" "Emma already knows. She overheard Tori and me discussing it last night. She said she's proud that Daddy's becoming good at building things instead of breaking things." The comment carried 12-year-old wisdom that adults often missed. Emma had understood that her father's previous career had been fundamentally destructive, taking money from people without creating equivalent value. Construction work, by contrast, produced buildings that sheltered families and businesses that employed communities. "What about Tyler?" "He wants to know if supervisors get to use bigger hammers." 9-year-old priorities, refreshingly practical and completely unconcerned with status or prestige. Tyler had adapted to his family's changed circumstances with the resilience of someone too young to mourn the loss of luxuries he'd never really needed. That evening I joined them for dinner at the duplex, a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables prepared on a barbecue that Marcus had assembled himself, using instructions he'd actually read instead of ignoring. The conversation centered around Emma's upcoming swim meet and Tyler's art project, rather than investment opportunities or financial strategies. Normal family topics, sustainable concerns, the kind of discussions that built relationships rather than performing them. "I have something to ask you," Marcus said as we cleared dishes with the efficient teamwork of people who'd learned that household maintenance was everyone's responsibility. What's that? Would you consider being involved in Emma and Tyler's lives on a regular basis? Not just emergency grandfather duties, but actual relationship building. Sunday dinners, school events, teaching them practical skills. I'm still learning myself. The request surprised me with its directness. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just a father asking his own father to be part of his grandchildren's education. Why now? Because they need to learn things from someone who's always chosen honesty over advantage. Someone who built something real instead of something fake. Marcus paused. And because I'm finally ready to be the kind of son who deserves to have his father involved in his family. The answer carried weight I hadn't expected. Marcus wasn't asking for forgiveness or rescue, but for the opportunity to rebuild our relationship based on who he was becoming rather than who he had been. Yes, I said, I'd like that. Some bridges take years to rebuild properly, but the construction is more satisfying when both sides participate in the engineering. Marcus had learned to value what he'd once dismissed, and I'd learned to hope for what I'd once written off as impossible. The family that emerged from consequences looked different than the one that had created them, but it was stronger for having been broken and rebuilt with honest materials and realistic blueprints. Outside, the Arizona summer evening settled over a neighborhood where children played in yards and parents planned sensible futures based on actual resources rather than borrowed expectations. Inside, Emma and Tyler argued about television shows, while Marcus and Tori discussed weekend plans that involved community pool visits rather than luxury resort getaways. Normal problems, sustainable solutions, the daily architecture of a family learning to build something that would last. 2 years after that Thanksgiving confrontation, I received a phone call that would have been impossible to imagine during our briefcase and documents showdown. Dad, it's Marcus. Dad, I have news. His voice carried the controlled excitement of someone who'd learned to temper enthusiasm with realistic assessment, a hard-won skill from months of construction work where overconfidence could result in structural failures. Good news or complicated news? Good news. Carlos is retiring next year. He's offered to sell me his construction business. I set down my coffee and gave the statement the consideration it deserved. Marcus buying a construction company represented a fundamental transformation that went far beyond career change. It meant he'd progressed from liability to asset, from someone Carlos tolerated to someone Carlos trusted with his life's work. What are the terms? Owner financing over 5 years. I'd start as managing partner, take full ownership when the notes paid off. Carlos stays on as consultant during the transition, helps me maintain relationships with existing clients. Can you afford it? Just barely. We'd have to use our emergency fund for the down payment, extend our restitution timeline by 18 months to manage cash flow. But the business is profitable, has steady contracts, and Carlos's reputation would transfer to me if I don't screw it up. The financial mechanics sounded reasonable, but the emotional significance was what impressed me most. Marcus was thinking in terms of long-term consequences rather than immediate gratification, weighing opportunity against obligation in ways that would have been impossible during his SyncFlow Solutions days. What does Tori think? She's terrified and excited in equal measure. Says it's the first time I've ever asked her opinion about a business decision before making it rather than after. That comment revealed more progress than any financial projection could. Marcus and Tori had rebuilt their marriage on foundations of mutual consultation rather than individual performance, learning to make decisions together instead of presenting each other with foregone conclusions. Have you discussed it with Emma and Tyler? Last night at dinner, Emma asked if owning a construction company meant we'd finally be able to afford the deluxe cable package. Tyler wanted to know if I'd get to use dynamite. Children's priorities, refreshingly practical and completely focused on immediate benefits rather than long-term implications. But their ability to ask direct questions suggested a family dynamic where important topics were discussed openly rather than hidden behind adult anxiety. What did you tell them? That owning a business means more responsibility, not more luxury. That success would be measured by how well we take care of our employees and clients, not by how much stuff we can buy. The answer demonstrated that Marcus had learned the difference between wealth and security, between accumulation and accomplishment. 2 years of honest work had taught him that sustainable success came from creating value rather than extracting it. When do you need to give Carlos an answer? End of the month. But I wanted to ask you something first. I waited, recognizing the tone of someone approaching a difficult topic. Would you consider co-signing the business loan, not as financial backup, but as character reference? Carlos trusts my work ethic, but banks want to see established credit relationships. The request carried weight beyond its practical implications. Marcus was asking me to risk my own financial reputation on his transformed character, to bet my resources on his continued growth rather than his previous failures. That's a significant commitment. It is. And if I fail, if I revert to old patterns, you'd be legally responsible for debts I can't pay. Marcus paused. But if I succeed, if this works, Emma and Tyler would grow up watching their father build something legitimate instead of maintaining something fake. The choice represented a moment of profound trust, requiring me to evaluate not just Marcus's current behavior, but his likelihood of sustained change under pressure. Business ownership would test his character in ways that employee status never could. I need to review the financials first, talk to Carlos about the transition plan, understand what I'd be risking and why. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to sign anything without complete information. The conversation ended with tentative optimism rather than immediate commitment, but the fact that Marcus had asked suggested he'd developed enough self-awareness to understand both the magnitude of the opportunity and the responsibility it entailed. 3 weeks later, I sat in Carlos Rodriguez's office reviewing 5 years of business records, client contracts, and financial statements. The construction company was exactly what Marcus had described: profitable but not extravagant, stable but not spectacular, built on reputation and repeat business rather than aggressive expansion or creative financing. He's ready, Carlos said, watching me study the employee handbook Marcus would inherit along with the business. Started as someone who'd never held real tools, now he can estimate jobs, manage crews, solve problems I would have handled the same way. What about leadership? Managing people is different than managing materials. He's good with the crews, doesn't try to impress them with how smart he is, doesn't ask them to do work he won't do himself. Men respect that. Carlos leaned back in his chair. Plus, he's honest about what he doesn't know, asks questions instead of pretending he has answers. The assessment carried particular weight coming from someone who'd built a successful business through 30 years of careful judgment about character and competence. Carlos had seen enough employees come and go to recognize the difference between temporary behavior change and fundamental personality evolution. Why are you selling to him instead of promoting from within? Because the guys who've been here longest are great at construction but terrible at business. Marcus understands both sides now. Can estimate costs, manage schedules, deal with clients and banks and inspectors. Carlos smiled. Also, he's the only employee who's ever asked me to teach him about worker safety regulations because he was worried about liability insurance. That detail revealed the transformation I'd been hoping to see. Marcus had progressed from someone who avoided responsibility to someone who actively sought it, from someone who externalized costs to someone who internalized them. I'll co-sign, I told Marcus that evening, with conditions. What conditions? Annual financial audits, monthly meetings with me to review business performance. Any decision to expand or change business model requires my approval until the loan is paid off. Understood. Also, if you ever use business resources for personal expenses, if you ever misrepresent company finances to clients or lenders, if you ever revert to the kind of behavior that created this situation, the loan becomes immediately due and payable. Marcus nodded with the sober attention of someone who understood that trust once rebuilt could be lost again through careless choices. One more thing, I continued. Emma and Tyler get summer jobs at the company when they're old enough. Paid positions doing real work, not ceremonial roles. They need to understand what their father does for a living and why honest work matters. I'd like that, Marcus said. I want them to see how businesses actually function instead of how I used to pretend they functioned. The loan closing took place on a Tuesday morning in October, surrounded by enough paperwork to build a small house. Marcus signed each document with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that legal language mattered more than verbal assurances, that contracts were promises backed by consequences rather than statements of good intentions. Congratulations, the loan officer said, sliding the final signature page across the table. You're now officially a business owner. Marcus looked at the documents that made him responsible for 15 employees, 12 active contracts, and a company reputation built over 30 years of reliable service. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll try to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. That evening, the family celebrated with pizza and swimming, the same combination that had marked their moving day 2 years earlier. But this time the celebration felt earned rather than consolatory. A recognition of progress achieved through sustained effort, rather than compensation for losses endured. What's the first thing you're going to change about the company? Emma asked, floating on her back in the pool that had become the center of countless neighborhood gatherings. Nothing, Marcus replied. Carlos built something that works. My job is to maintain it, not fix it. That's boring, Tyler observed with 9-year-old directness. Boring is good in the construction business. Boring means nobody gets hurt. Projects finish on schedule and clients recommend you to other clients. What about the name? Are you going to change it to Henderson Construction? Marcus considered the question with the thoughtfulness of someone who'd learned that names carried weight beyond marketing value. I think we'll keep it Rodriguez Construction. Carlos built the reputation that goes with that name. Changing it would be like erasing the history that made the business valuable. The decision revealed the depth of Marcus's transformation. 2 years earlier, he would have immediately rebranded everything to center his own identity. Now he understood that inheritance meant stewardship, that true ownership meant preserving what worked rather than imposing change for its own sake. Will you make more money as a business owner? Emma asked with 12-year-old practicality. Eventually, if I do the job well. But for the first few years, most of the profit will go toward paying off the business loan and building up cash reserves. Marcus floated beside his daughter. The goal isn't to make more money immediately. The goal is to build something sustainable that can support our family and our employees for decades. Like Grandpa's construction business. Exactly like that. The conversation continued as the Arizona evening settled around them. But I found myself thinking about cycles and generations, about the patterns that repeat and the ones that finally break. Marcus was building the kind of business his father had tried to build 40 years earlier, but with wisdom earned through failure rather than confidence borrowed against future success. Some lessons take everything to teach, but the students who survive them become teachers themselves, passing on wisdom that can only be earned through experience rather than inherited through genetics. Marcus was finally ready to build something worth inheriting, and Emma and Tyler would grow up understanding that real security came from competence rather than performance, from creating value rather than manipulating perceptions. The pool lights reflected stars that had witnessed countless family celebrations, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the beginning of a story that would be worth telling to grandchildren who would grow up knowing their grandfather as someone who built things, rather than someone who had once broken them. Some families rebuild themselves one honest day at a time, and sometimes those rebuilt families become stronger than the ones that never faced the necessity of starting over. Outside the pool area, the neighborhood settled into evening routines that would be repeated tomorrow and the day after, the comfortable rhythm of lives built on sustainable foundations rather than dramatic gestures. Inside the duplex that had become home, Two children fell asleep planning summer jobs at their father's construction company, dreaming of building things that would last longer than the problems that had once seemed impossible to solve. Real wealth isn't what accumulates in bank accounts, but what survives when everything else falls apart. When adult children choose entitlement over character, loving parents face an impossible choice: enable their destruction or enforce the consequences that authentic love demands. The greatest inheritance we can leave isn't money that prevents growth, but wisdom earned through honest struggle. Sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is refuse to rescue someone from their own choices while protecting innocent children from the fallout. True family wealth builds through generations of integrity, not shortcuts that mortgage character for convenience. The hardest love requires the courage to let someone fall far enough to learn how to stand.